Okay, we are live here, MythVision podcast, ladies and gentlemen. John Dominic Crossan is going to be joining us today, Dr. Crossan, and you can challenge him with your questions. I'd love to get into the historical Jesus, what the Apostle Paul may or may not have said or meant. Of course, he's an academic, and just to tease everybody, I've got courses coming out with Del C. Allison Jr. on the quest for the historical Jesus, where he goes through the history of the academics who've been taking critical analyses, if you will, of the New Testament and trying to know what we can know, what we can't know, that kind of stuff, all the way from Schweitzer to Cross to down to John Dominic Crossan. He was the eighth recording that me and Del C. Allison Jr. did on the historical Jesus, which he had a radical new position compared to some of the other ones previously who had an apocalyptic figure, like chiefly an apocalyptic approach to Jesus, whereas Crossan had a different approach, which was unique, and I look forward to hearing some of his takes. Let me go ahead and tease everybody here. We have his book, Render Unto Caesar. I need to be visible so you can understand what I'm saying. I listened to this book from North Carolina when we went to vacation with my family in Florida. The whole trip, it was just a fascinating book to listen to. He gets into the book of Revelation, the Sibylline oracles, and how they relate to this whole tradition of what's going on in the Apocalypse of John, the Nero, resurrection theme, which is actually found in both the Sibylline oracles and the Apocalypse of John. Luke, Acts, how should we understand these books? A lot of that, the historical Jesus. What was Jesus doing saying, render unto Caesar? That's the whole chief point. There's a social political aspect to the New Testament, and it's not just the book of Revelation that does this. Like, the New Testament is either accommodational to the Roman Empire or anti-Roman, it seems, anti-imperial Rome. So get the book, get you a copy just so you could see it up close and personal. This is what it looks like, and that coin right there, he talks a lot about God Sebastos Caesar, like God worship Caesar. He is claiming to be a god and, of course, worshiping him. Now, he also has a Facebook page you should go and like. It is in the description of the YouTube video here. And, of course, we've been working hard bringing you the recordings I've done with Dom. And this is the latest, Jesus vs. Caesar. The quality is amazing. I'll give you a sneak peek here in just a moment. But we also have a recent release of Dr. Robert G. Hoyland, Jesus the Magician with Religion for Breakfast. I did another one with Dom on the Mark of the Beast. If you really want to get behind what is going on in the book of Revelation, check out this episode. You'll figure it out. Another one I did with Dom that is on Patreon. I did release that one public. There's a lot of work. This one I haven't done public yet with Dr. James D. Tabor. Working very hard. Please consider helping us out. It's as little as $3 a month. If you're able to do more, of course, that's always appreciated. But $3 a month. I think a Starbucks coffee costs $7 or something for like a good coffee from Starbucks. It's less than half of the cup of coffee from Starbucks to help us bring you what you love here at MythVision. So please help us out by joining the Patreon. And with that being said, I literally have been procrastinating so that I could bring on Dr. John Dominic Crossan. So let our intro begin, and then we'll get John on. We are MythVision. Dom, welcome back. How are you?
Good to be with you, Derek, once again, and with your Patreon people.
Thank you so much, Dom. I know you were searching for a boat.
Yes.
So for those who don't know, he was looking for a boat that they've actually discovered a first century boat that was on the Sea of Galilee, the Lake of Tiberias, and we're going to be showing that here shortly as we get into this, because I want to talk about the historical Jesus. I want to talk about Paul. I want to talk about anything. And if you have any questions, feel free to super chat your questions. They help the channel and you will get them asked of Dr. Crossan. So, Dom, I showed your book, Render Unto Caesar, the latest, greatest. But I do need to tease others as well that you have written. How many publications have you, like, as far as books go?
This was the 30th. The Caesar one was the 30th.
Wow.
Started back in 1966 when we were all much younger.
So 30. How many New York Times bestsellers have you had?
Oh, New York Times. No, usually I never made it into that rarefied. It's usually Publishers Weekly bestsellers that I will accept.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. I mean, you've written quite a bit. They're all showing up behind you as well.
That one up in the corner, the Historical Jesus, that one from 1991, is the one that kind of, I'm going to say, inaugurated the surge in the Historical Jesus, because it became a sort of a code word for the capacity to ask and answer any questions about the New Testament by putting it into its historical matrix.
Wow. Yeah, this is going to be a fun discussion. Dom, did you email me by any chance that boat?
What I did, Derek, to see if it works is, because it's too big, I have it as part of a keynote presentation. And I know on a Zoom share screen, I can do it. So
okay.
It's going to be an experiment. I have it on my own screen.
Okay.
It would take time to cut it out and everything and get it sent to you. So we'll see if I can do it. But at least I'll talk about it. And then if you let me share,
go ahead. If you want to try, it should pop up at the bottom. And I'll go ahead and I'll just say hey to everybody in the chat while you're working on that. Theophilus, thank you so much for joining the chat, my friend. I seriously appreciate it. Lord Roku, Eric, Danielski, Mr. Evac, good to see you here. Ray Ashima, good to see you here again. Vesper in the chat. Larry Jackson, Josie, Deb, Apollo's Christian Apologetics. I got somebody that we're going to have you debate. And they take the opposite view. I think they try to argue that Jesus did not claim to be God, and neither did any of his followers claim that he was a divine in any respect. I think he's more of a modern day Arian. I mean that in the Christian sense, that Jesus was not God, obviously. But yeah, we'll be in touch. I talked to Jonathan earlier about that. Ray Ashima, how did Roman civilization impact the Galilean Jews in the first century? We're going to get into this. We're going to get into this because this is in the vein of the historical Jesus.
I don't see how to work this on your share.
Basically, so you hit the plus sign at the bottom.
Okay, let me get me on again. Let me see where I am for a second. So
okay.
Okay, I'm down. I see share at the bottom. I'm hitting share.
Okay.
And then it says slides, video file. Let me hit slides.
Does it say entire screen?
Hang on. It says slides, video file, share screen.
Share screen. Try that.
Okay, screen sharing. Share screen. I'm going to hit it. Okay, let me try and see what would happen if I did this.
And it should say window. Next to entire screen, there should be window right there.
Okay, entire screen window. Here we go.
And then you click the one that you want to share.
Okay, can I just move it in? Won't let me do that, I suppose. No. Google share. We're getting there. Okay, so it's window.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and Keynote, Google Chrome. Yeah. I don't see I think I must have it to put it in anywhere.
If it's not available there, I would just go back to entire screen and you'll be able to share your whole screen to your computer. We'll be able to see everything though.
Okay.
At least it'll be available that way. And while you do that, I do have a super chat we might as well grab. Mr. Evac says, Dr. John lived through World War II. That's simply incredible.
Oh, yeah, I was born. Window preview keynote. Hang on. Maybe this will work. I do have a keynote.
Okay.
Go to system preferences. I know you may lose me. Let's hope and cross my fingers.
I hope not. Because it was, you could tell everybody how difficult it's been to get you into this.
No, if we had prepared it, I think what we better do today, let me see, location.
I think we could come back to the boat. Is there an image on Google at all of a first century boat? The first what? Oh, we lost Dom. No. It's difficult to figure his way out on the internet here, so please bear with us. He's coming. We're going to get into this because he says some stuff in his book and then, of course, in our recordings that were just really interesting. You were raptured, Dom. Hello? He did get raptured. Yes. He got raptured. Bear with me. He's coming. He is coming. He's trying to figure out this technology, and it is difficult with some of the academics on figuring out StreamYard. But so let me just tease you, and he's going to want to build up the case here. They're in the first century, of course, Rome, is in control. But Tiberius is changing the Sea of Galilee. He thinks there's more historical kernel here than what a lot of the other critical scholars, obviously Richard Carrier would take it and be on the whole myth side. But he suggests that at this time, the emperor Tiberius is changing the name, pretty much making it the Lake of Tiberias. The Sea of Galilee is becoming the Lake of Tiberias. And they're trying to control, kind of like he talked about, if those of you who have joined my Patreon are aware of the video, this whole thing is becoming globalization, where Rome is trying to control and monetize everything and be in control of everything that comes to food and what they're selling, etc. So here in the book of Revelation, it talks about buying and selling with the mark, right? Like they're against you wanting to participate in Rome's endeavors, the whore of Babylon. But this lake is where there's this protest, this figure Jesus in Galilee, this Galilean Jew, would have been standing up against this whole idea and saying, no, he has fishermen who are literally from this lake as his followers. This is the whole point that John tries to point out. And I want him to elaborate because I'm probably going to butcher some of that. But in the meantime, while we wait for him to jump back in here, I might as well show you the tease. And the tease I have is this one right here. And let me know, make sure you guys can hear me and everything. This is what I have on my Patreon. I've already got 3 videos up on the Patreon right now of what I've done with Dom. And here is the opening.
Here's the trap. We finally got him. We'll force him to make his move. And either way, he either loses his constituency or he loses his life. Now, he's already doing a counter gotcha. I mean, how can I pay taxes if I don't carry the coin? And what it says in Greek is theos, sebastos, Kaiser. Now, in English, that is God, Augustus, Caesar. Sebastos is the Greek word for Augustus. It's Caesar the Augustus, like Jesus the Christ.
Dr. Crossan or Dom? Jesus said, render unto Caesar that which is Caesar, and render unto God that which is God. Okay. There's your tease. It is on Patreon. There are plenty more. Dom, you got raptured, but you're back. Can you hear me?
Can you hear me?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Okay, give me a second. I can't hear you. Just 1 second.
Look, God sent Dom back down. He said, "Hey, I was going to rapture you, but you're talking about my Jesus here, and I'm not sure what you're going to say about him." So he's testing him.
All right. Can you hear me?
Yes. Can you hear me?
All right. What happened actually was when I was trying to do that, my browser Safari doesn't play nice with Chrome. Okay, they don't like one another. So when I was trying to shift to show you to get the boat out of my system, it went to Safari and shut down my whole computer. It froze. Okay, so I won't be able to show you pictures, but I'll get them to you.
Hey, don't worry.
Okay.
Dom, we'll do again. We'll definitely go back in, and I
Yeah,
think
I
we
want to
need
do
to
it again.
show.
That's
In
crucial.
in fact, I have in one of those recordings that we did, we talk about the historical Jesus and up to his death. I think we should. You mentioned the Lake of Tiberias and the Sea of Galilee and things like that, and I think then I'll insert those images for people who want to check that out, or we'll do a follow up live stream where we can share it while we're doing that. But as we're collecting questions from people, I wanted to open up the door on Jesus. I was mentioning to the audience as you were raptured for a moment from God, God took you off planet Earth and then he sent you back. Jesus is a Galilean Jew. His followers are fishermen in this lake or Sea of Galilee, we like to call it, that is now the Lake of Tiberias. Set the political stage, set the background, what's on the ground happening here in the first century that you would suggest that the historical Jesus, his upbringing, what environment he's in, who are those who are going to follow him and why?
Okay.
What's going on?
All right. Let me imagine two vectors crossing, like two searchlights in the sky. You go into, say, Mark's Gospel. First thing you find out is Jesus is over there by the lake. In fact, if you slip into Matthew, you find that he moves from his home at Nazareth to the lake at Capernaum. Now, anyone who asks questions, though some people are trained not to ask questions of the Bible, you'd say, what's he doing? Why isn't he staying at home, working with his own people? What's he doing over there by the lake, first of all? Second thing, you begin to notice that all the first followers are mentioned to be fishers. So you get that pun, fishers of men, but they're fishers first before you can do the pun. Thirdly, all the villages mentioned, Bethany up there in the north, Capernaum, or Magdala, for example, Mary of Magdala, they're major fishing villages. Now, please imagine on the northwest quadrant of the Sea of Galilee. If you think of the Galilee as a clock, everything is going on pretty much between 9 o'clock and 12 o'clock, as it were. So now, supposing I hold that factor aside and say, now, let me forget about Jesus. He doesn't exist. I'm just going now into history. And I want to know, what is Antipas doing on the Sea of Galilee that, for example, makes it shift its name to the lake? It's not a sea, really, it's a lake. The Lake of Galilee becomes the Lake of Tiberias. See it there? Now, notice all those little villages. They're all up there, pretty much, the first ones at least, in the northwest quadrant. And they're fishing villages. So here's the historical question. We know, this is history, we have, Josephus and coins and all the rest of the paraphernalia of history. We know that Antipas changed his capital, which was inland Sepphoris, way inland. It's a lovely spot, by the way. It's up on a kind of a hill. I remember trying to take a video there in the hum of the wind, So it's a lovely spot, very healthy, by the way. No mosquitoes. It's up there. And then around the year 90, he opens for business a new capital on the lake, rather unhealthy, by the way, on the lakefront at a place called Tiberias. Calls it by the new emperor who comes in 14. Augustus dies in 14 CE, and along comes Tiberius. So 5 years later, good old Antipas has got himself a new capital. Now, historians and archaeologists sometimes, and it makes me scream, don't ask, why did he do that? You really don't change your capital unless there maybe is an earthquake, which is like a hint from God to move, maybe. Because if you change your capital, see now, Sepphoris, you can hardly show it. It's way inland, probably a bit farther, I think, even than your map. You may have, if you can scroll your map to the right.
It's a Google image. I just wanted to show Tiberias right there on the shore, though, to show where it would have been located.
Yeah, so get Tiberias down. Now, the historical question we're asking, Jesus doesn't exist, as it were, is why does anyone, just imagine if we tried to change Washington, changing your capital infuriates your aristocracy, because what do you do with a used villa at Sepphoris? If I'm a big shot, like his chief of staff, as it were, I got my gorgeous villa at Sepphoris. Now I have to move 20 miles to the east, build a new villa, and I'm mad. And even the ordinary little people who come in, the alley scribe, who knows enough to take down contracts, and he sits in the alley every day. I'm mad because I can't move 20 miles to Sepphoris for my little peasant holding. So when I read, for example, that everyone says Tiberias is built over a graveyard and is super impure, yep, that's what I'd say if I was mad. And it's filled with illegal images that are immoral by Jewish, yep, that's what I'd say too. Antipas is doing something which infuriates everyone, and therefore, he ruled for about 43 years, the fox. I figure he had to have a reason. Now, if you don't ask that, you're not a historian. You can say, well, I'm guessing. No, you're trying to figure out why a historical character did something. Not reading his mind, you're interpreting his action. I believe what he is doing is setting out to commercialize the lake, and he's over there with Tiberius to control it, and to move Galilee into, remember we talked before, Roman imperialism is a fancy name for Mediterranean globalization. When we look at the Roman Empire, we see this lovely donut of red around the Mediterranean. They're not accumulating land in a nice little circle.
So when I hear other academics try to downplay this idea that Rome, the big bad boogeyman, and they're like, no, Jews were completely happy and completely content, and they were not concerned at all with that. Thank you, honey. They were not concerned at all with all of this and stuff, and they talk about how the legions are out here, and they're just all happy, they're comfortable and cozy. Your approach makes me think, sure, to some extent there may be some truth to that, but the point is just like in the Maccabees, we had the Seleucids and the Maccabees in this issue among Jews. They weren't agreeing with each other on this, and they were not happy with the Greeks being in control. Of course, Rome is dominating now. Judas the Galilean, for example, is a good example, I suspect, of a non-violent protester against what's taking place with this accommodation with Rome.
Yep.
And
well, Derek, look, it's a matter of evidence. If somebody were to say to me, the Irish just love the British Empire, I would talk about the rebellions. Now, look at Rome. Rome arrives officially, say, in 60 CE. In the next 200 years, there are 4 major armed rebellions. Not even talking about the unarmed stuff. Armed rebellions. The War of 66 to 74 took the best legions Rome had in Egypt and Syria to put down a revolt in a small little country, tiny little country. I mean, you can't, the 4 BCE, an armed rebellion that brought whenever the legions march, there's serious trouble. 66 to 74, legions back down. 115 to 170 across North Africa. Brutal war. And then, of course, 132 to 135, the Bar Kokhba. Then there are no more rebellions. And that's when the Jews stopped reading Josephus and Philo and people like that and left them for the Christians. The simple evidence is that there is incessant rebellions. And Rome under Hadrian, came dangerously close to doing to Judaism what it did to the Celts, declaring their religion a forbidden religion. They came dangerously close to saying, maybe the reason these people keep rebelling is that this weird religion we have, which we think is just a superstition, but maybe it's a rebellious superstition. So after, for example, the War of 66 to 74, the entire, what would you call it, tribute to the Jewish temple was detoured across the entire country, not just the homeland, but the diaspora. All that money went to the temple of Jupiter Capitolinus, Jupiter Optimus Maximus, on the Capitoline Hill in Rome. That's dangerously close to saying, I'm finished. Now, it could have been Hadrian forbidding circumcision. Now, they came within a hair's breadth, I think, of Rome saying, that's it. We forbid male circumcision, or any way they wanted to say it. This is a forbidden religion because it sponsors rebellion.
Now we're discussing the Druids here, right? The Druids were completely annihilated.
Right, they were annihilated on that island of Wales. Yeah, because they finally decided that this comes from it. I mean, to be honest, the British Empire made the same conclusion, correctly, by the way, about the Irish, that if you could just get rid of the penal laws were intended to get rid of the Roman Catholic religion, because then they'll like the Welsh and the England, Wales, and the Scotch, they'll all be the same. So the same decision that you mentioned before, the Seleucids figured the only way we'll ever get these Jews as part of a socio-economic part of our nice little Syrian empire is to finally get rid of this religion. The danger, the model was there from the Syrian, the abomination of desolation. The model was there that the Romans could have, and I say came within a hair's breadth of deciding that. And that's why Judaism after that decided we will be a holy people in the family, in the home, temple is gone, in the synagogue, and we will let history, we won't even preserve Josephus, because Josephus records even what we did. That's why only Christians kept Josephus. So I don't know whether there is a refusal to accept the political implications of what's going on by trying to get what I call the herd of elephants in the room, the Romans out there, because of course they are perfectly right that the legions are on the border. That's the genius of the Roman Pax Romana, put the legions on the border. But that's where the legions that hits Israel every time it rebels come from, the borderlands of Egypt and Syria. So with all due respect, I think any scholar who tells you that the Romans were not important, significant, deadly important in the Jewish homeland in the first century is dreaming.
Thank you so much, Dom. Let me plug my thing up here because I think my microphone is dying on us here.
Oh dear.
Not my microphone, sorry, my mouse. And I don't want to get trapped with I can't click on a super chat or I can't scroll or anything. Let's get into some of these Q&As because I'm seeing Jesus on this lakefront. He's talking to other fishermen, other Jews like himself. There's this promise that God's kingdom will come. And this is something we know the Dead Sea Scrolls talk about, that we know that Jews are thinking. And Judas the Galilean, it seems, would have been another figure like this. John the Baptist would have been another figure like this. These are figures who are hoping God comes in and puts them on top. They're tired of being on bottom. That's what it seems like. Not necessarily in a warfare manner, but you're saying in a non-violent sense, they're expecting the kingdom of God. So I'm going to scroll through some Q&As here and see where we can go. We may come back to this, but maybe taking a deeper dive on what we can maybe paint a picture on Jesus, what he's doing in protesting. What is his goal? What's he doing? And there's a shameless plug of render unto Caesar in his drink. So get you a copy of the book. Jorge, thank you so much. Torres, I don't know if this is relevant at all, but what do you guys think of the Gospel of Judas? It was a little mind-blowing because I'd never heard of it. Dr. Crossan?
All right, we're not talking about history, but the story of Judas in the gospel, for example, in Mark's gospel, never explains why he betrays Jesus. Never betrays. And to be honest with you, from an historical point of view, I've gone backwards and forwards. 49 to 51% is the Judas, the apostle who betrays Jesus, historical or part of Mark's constant denigration of the 12. He always calls Judas one of the 12. He's not necessary. I think Caiaphas would have figured out where Jesus was without needing anyone to betray him. So it simply is answering the kind of the question, why did Judas betray him? John's gospel gives us some reason for it, that he was maybe stealing the common purse. But I don't consider it, I don't think any scholar does consider it to be an historical gospel in any way associated with the character of Judas that we know in the New Testament. So it is interesting for somebody, I've forgotten exactly when it's dated, in the 2nd or 3rd century, but it doesn't tell me anything about Judas in the apostle, let's just say, in the New Testament.
Thank you so much, Dom. I appreciate that. Thank you so much for the super chat. Ask Mode US UK 1. What impact did the PBS documentary From Jesus to Christ, where you were one of the main talking heads, have on your career? What impact?
I think it had a profound impact. To be honest with you, what started it off for me was the publication of the Historical Jesus, the Life of a Mediterranean Jewish Peasant. When Peter Steinfeld put that on the front page of the New York Times Christmas edition as his Christmas story in 1991, that's really what started it for me. Really, that was what started. Everything else came from that, because before that I'd been writing for scholars, and that book, with all due respects to anyone who tried to read it, was a $30 book written for scholars. It was not intended for a lay audience, even though it didn't do the footnotes, it did them in a different way. It was an attempt to summarize where I had been after 20 years of studying the historical Jesus. I'd been leading up to that book. So it was published. And then, because John Mayer of Notre Dame's first volume of a 7-volume book came out the same time, that would be November, I think, of 91. So Peter Steinfeld decided, there's my Christmas story. I've got a conservative Roman Catholic priest and a liberal ex-Roman Catholic priest. So I have my clash, and he plunked it on the front page of the New York Times, which meant, of course, it went to all the other papers which wanted a Christmas story and just took it from the Times syndicate. So it was all over the world. It was on the international edition of the Herald Tribune, I think, or whatever it was called. A friend of mine saw it in Singapore. He was at a seminar there in Singapore for Christmas. So that's really what started it in 91. The book then ended up on the bestseller lists. And to be honest with you, I was sorry for people. I know where my wife's mover stopped moving. This was a terribly difficult book because it had to talk about Judaism within the Roman Empire before it could even talk about Jesus. There was a person who bought it and complained to Harper Collins, I bought this book about the historical Jesus and we don't get to him till page, I'm making it up, 200. So I wrote back to him and explained to him that I had to set the matrix. Mm-hmm. That I could just go into the New Testament and make up whatever I wanted, or I could say, here's the whole matrix of its own time and place. Now, let me put Jesus into that matrix, and we will see what fits into, say, Galilean Judaism in the 20s of the 1st century, and what is clearly from the beginning of the 2nd century. So it let me separate the historical Jesus from the layers of the tradition. That really started it. It was because of that book, of course, that the PBS Frontline documentary did from Jesus to Christ. And that's where a lot of people found out that something was happening.
Thank you so much for that response. Appreciate the super chat. Paul Cherry says, hi there, Derek. I was wondering, please, on your last podcast, Dragons in Genesis, with Jason, you mentioned a 2-volume book on Enoch and Babylon, and just asking, would you have the title? It would be appreciated. Thank you. I do not have that title, but Paul, I can get it for you easily. If you email me, Derek at MythVisionPodcast.com, I'll get you the titles to the Enoch, the 2-volume book on Enoch, because I'm close friends with Jason. I can actually call him and text him. If you just email me, I'll email you back that book. Just let me know that you're the one asking, and I'll be sure to do it. Thank you so much for that super chat. I really appreciate it.
And Paul must be in England, I think, from the donation in pounds.
Yeah. Yep. Thank you. Ruby Snow, just showing love, ordered render unto Caesar. It's going to take a while to get to me in South Africa. Can't wait. Thanks, Derek and Dr. Crossan. Thank you for the support and getting the book. If I may, Dr. Crossan, what made me interested in your book is I went from, you probably didn't even know this about me, and I mean, I may, some things I've mentioned, but I went from believing Jesus was literally God in the flesh, creedal Orthodox Christian, if you will, to thinking he didn't exist at all. When I became a skeptic, I was like, he's a complete myth, completely made up. Everything is complete fiction. I would use things like mimesis, or showing how the New Testament is just copying the Old Testament, or, and you name it. And when you do that over and over and over, the layers of the onion start to peel away, and you feel like, okay, well, there's nothing here in your mind. But I also kept looking and learning. And what I liked about what you did in your previous response about from Jesus to Christ, that if we were to place him in the 20s, 30s AD, like in Galilee, what would it look like? And what do we have clues in the New Testament, in the Gospels, let's say, that kind of give us a setting that would make sense historically for a Jew to be doing these exact things? And if it makes sense, I've heard this said, and I think this is a very powerful phrase, even though it sounds really dumb and simple. Most people who existed on planet Earth have had nothing ever written about them. In fact, we would never even know they existed at all, because nobody wrote about them.
Yeah, let me take 2 words from that moment on the Sea of Galilee.
Okay.
The word is tradition, and the other word is traction. In a way, what Jesus is saying, the salvific presence of God, any prophet of the Old Testament would say that's here. They weren't just waiting. The prophets, they would have said, God is present if we would just accept God. The problem is, the prophets kept saying, you guys won't accept God's vision of how the world should be. Now, what Jesus adds to that is traction. By traction, I mean a moment in time and place when people are ready. If you think of those fishers on the Sea of Galilee, who before Tiberius arrived, they were able to go down there from, say, their small peasant holdings, toss in a net, even the crowd get together and own a boat, launch the boat, supplement their protein intake, as it were, with fish. Now along comes Tiberius. All of a sudden, dried fish, salted fish, garum fish sauce into the Mediterranean globalization market is what Antipas is after. All right, if I'm a fisherman, I want to know, what did I do wrong? This is not right. And now I hear this guy saying, well, God's rule is always against this sort of injustice. That's traction. Now I care. Now I'm concerned. Before that, I was busy with my boats, and everything was doing fine, and I was surviving okay. And this was a lovely dream. Someday God would come. Yeah, fine. And it was all off there. Tradition and traction. So all of a sudden, there's a message, like the phrase I used before, occupy the lake. So even to call fishers is a subversive act. These fishers should be down in Tiberius's fish factories working for Antipas. So it's terribly politico-religious. Can I put it that way? Or religio-political. right from the get-go. That's what gives Jesus. Otherwise, he could be one more prophet. I mean, we've had 500 years of them, really. One more prophet, and if somebody takes down his writings, we'll have more writings like we have for Amos, who never wrote a thing, but somebody took it down. And there'll be one more prophet in a long list of people saying, this is the way you should run the world. And everyone's saying, yeah, whatever. So traction is terribly important for me. It gives you the time and the place. If you take that out, then I have no understanding why it would happen there. Now, can I say one other thing? I beg of people, please understand, in the first century, the entire world of the first century understood that a human being, that is a real human being, could be called divine or Son of God or even God incarnate if, here's the job description, if that person had done something calculated as of extraordinary benefit for the human race. Like Augustus brought peace after 20 years of savage civil war with legions on both sides. If he's not a god, what the heck do we need them for? So somebody who did an extraordinary act for the human race and thereby, of course, manifested God. So Augustus is the revelation of God.
Right.
Now, I find no problem. I don't know if anyone ever did it, but honestly, if I had a record definitely dated to the time of Jesus, that somebody looked at the coin and said, well, it says here Augustus is God. That guy Jesus is my God. That is an utterly first century meaningful statement. Jesus is a revelation of the biblical God, a manifestation of the biblical God, kind of what the biblical God looks like in sandals.
So just so you know, I did find a boat.
Okay.
That looks like it, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, shall I talk about that a bit?
I mean, they're on the boat. Might as well, right? Because your book is trying to get to the social political issue that stems at the root of a Jesus movement.
Yeah, for the audience, I mean, if somebody says to me, and it has been said to me, who the heck do you think you are? You're 2,000 years after all these people, and you're trying to tell them what they really meant. How dare you do that? All I can say is this. I've read all what they had to say. I've read every other text I could get my hands on from the same time. I went to all the places. I've tried to get a sense of what they meant by what they said. That's what I've tried to do. And not say immediately, well, it says this, so I know this and I know that. So I have to spend a huge amount of time. For example, look at the boat. Let's look at it. This is just one boat. It's just one boat. You could say, hey, well, it's nothing. What happened was the Sea of Galilee was in a bad drought, and so the shoreline had receded, and they could see in the mud the gunnels of a boat that was sunk in the mud. It was off Magdala, by the way. So there had been there probably a boatyard, and they found this boat. Now, it was terribly dangerous. It was described, the situation, as the excavation from hell. Because as soon as they saw it, the water started to come up again. So it was danger of being swamped again and ruined. So they had to cocoon the whole boat in styrofoam, all around it, below it, and float it over to a museum, which is where it is now. And for 10 years it was in a bath of, I can't even imagine the chemicals, to be honest with you. Sarah and I did see it in 1993. No, 99. I think maybe 99. We saw it in its own bath. What they were doing is getting all the water out and putting some kind of a chemical in so the whole thing didn't come across. Now it's in the Kibbutz Gennesaret, where you can see it, Gennesaret, and it's in the museum. Here's the story behind it. It is a symbol, not an argument, but it's not a proof. It's a symbol for the economic squeeze on the Sea of Galilee in the first century. It's only one boat. But what happened to it was it didn't sink in a storm. The day came where they couldn't keep it patched anymore. There are 12 different types of wood in it. It's like excellent boat rides, trying desperately to keep this thing afloat with any wood they can find. It started off as a really good boat with Tabor oak in it, and it was really good. The 12 different types of patchwood. It's like if you've ever been to Havana, Cuba, you see these mechanics running cars from the 50s and 60s, and they're the best mechanics in the world. Of course, they can keep these things going. So they had this boat, but the day came they couldn't patch it anymore. They took off the stem post, the stern post, the mast, of course, the oars, obviously, and most of the iron nails almost.
So this is a gutted boat. This is gutted.
This is not sunk in a storm. This is gutted. It's like buried, with all due respect. Push it out into the lake and let it sink. And I would bet there are lots of other ones in the same place if the lake ever recedes again and we can see the offshore.
Right.
So I'm using it myself, not as an argument, because it's only one boat. You could say the next one we find might be a lovely boat, but as an indication of the economic squeeze, the traction that Jesus's vision have for the presence of God's rule. So he would say to them, as it were, this is Antipas's rule. This is Rome's rule. What do you think about it? What's it doing to your livelihood? What's it doing to your life? And they're not hearing Amos talking about Jeroboam II. They're hearing Jesus talking about Antipas and Antipas's fisheries and the whole Roman program. So Romanization.
This is a picture of Antioch, by the way, or an art of supposedly Antioch, and it says Matthew Peter, if you will. But
yes,
just it's an interesting art just to point that out. But yeah.
That doesn't have, for example, that doesn't have a mast.
Right.
So this boat is about 26 feet long. It's the workboat of, that's a good model of it, actually.
Right.
It's from the same place, actually. There's a model we were there in the 20s. I've forgotten where it was, actually. And we did get to meet the people who found the boat. There were two peasants just walking along the seashore, but they were amateur archaeologists. So they recognized immediately what they had, and they brought in the experts and didn't damage it in any way. So it's a perfect example for me of how I go about stuff. I look at that historical stuff and I take it in and I try to figure out, okay, for some scholars, and scholars I respect, they've said everything Antipas was doing was lovely. The economy was booming. Of course it was, but ask not for whom the boom booms. It may not boom for thee. The economy can be booming, as it rather is right now in America, but you may be still out of a job. So Antipas, of course, to take tiny Galilee and the Lake of Tiberias into the mainstream of Mediterranean globalization was very, very good news for some people, but not for everyone.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the everyone's, what Eliot called the pale, dissatisfied ones, not the poorest of the poor, because they've learned to survive, but the people who yesterday were surviving fairly well. They could get fish, they could use it, they could sell them. They were doing just, above the margin. They were surviving just a little bit above, not a little bit below the margin. Those are the ones, because they know that something has happened that made things worse. And if something can happen that makes things worse, that's when the danger is of rebellion, because then people are thinking, well, couldn't it get better too? So the historical matrix that I find from Antipas, my one vector, and the Sea of Galilee, and the 20s, and his coins, and everything, including that boat, and what I see from Jesus, and I understand why Mary of Magdala, the biggest fishing village until Tiberias, plunks down right next to it. She's a major contributor. I think she probably had a major fishing village. I think that's why she's not identified by her husband, if she had one, or her father, who may be dead. She is Mary of Magdala. She is known probably as a prominent, important fishing business. And it's now been very badly damaged by Tiberius. So I don't mean at all that she's looking for a new job. I know she knows God's rule is in a clash with Rome's rule. And it's happening right here on my little village of Magdala. Okay, I'm listening, Jesus.
Wow. Oh man, there's so much here to milk on trying to figure out what's going on historically. I like your method and how you're approaching this. It's a really interesting thing. I never thought about this way, Dom. I really appreciate it. Constellation Pegasus, thank you for the super chat. I'm just pressing through these here. What is your biggest contradiction or error in the Old Testament you can show a Christian?
Wow. It's so strange. I would much prefer what's the most important thing in the Old Testament you can show a Christian. Let me reverse it a little bit. I'm coming backwards. The most serious contradiction in the entire Christian Bible, Genesis to Apocalypse, is the book of Apocalypse. There is nothing in the entire Old Testament that contradicts God in the same level that the book of Revelation contradicts the vision of God in Christ in the New Testament. Now, really, take that seriously. What happens in the Old Testament, let me just look at the Torah for a minute, the first 5 books. The final one, the book of Deuteronomy, says that God is a God of sanctions, rewards, and punishments here below on this earth, and that God sanctions by punishing the evil. If you obey the Lord your God, you will be rewarded. If you disobey the Lord your God, you will be punished. This is Deuteronomy 28. Read it and weep. And it says everything is punished or rewarded here below. Now, when that is written into the Bible, I'm talking about the Hebrew Bible as well as the Christian Bible, the very first chapter, Genesis 1, contradicts that. It says human beings are made in the image and likeness of God to run the world for a just God justly. And it never says, not for a moment, how is God going to handle you if you disobey? Where's the punishments in Genesis 1? There are no punishments because there are consequences. If you are made in the image and likeness of God and don't act accordingly, then there will be consequences, not punishments. This is as horribly simple as if you go up to the roof of a 30-story building and think you're a bird and see what happens. And please do not say that God hit you with the pavement as a punishment. There are consequences for not being what we are. They're not punishments, they're consequences. So I would say, if you want to look at error in the Old Testament, but it is corrected in the Old Testament, and it reappears in the New Testament, uncorrected in Revelation. There's this whole idea of a world controlled by a God of punishments, rewards and punishments, is absolutely false. And the book of Job said that, thank you very much, already in the Old Testament. And we still have it right back in the book of Revelation at some time in the future. So the whole idea of punishments rather than consequences. Let me stop for a second to make certain you understand that distinction for me. If a person drives their car into a tree and kills themselves, that is a consequence. It flows internally from the action. The person drives the car into the tree and is fined by the police for drunk driving, let's say. That's a punishment. That comes externally. Consequences flow internally from the action. Punishments come externally, and maybe you can escape them by mercy or forgiveness or whatever. Consequences are internal. So the whole idea of a God of punishments, I consider to be totally false, whether you find it in the book of Deuteronomy, where you do find it, by the way, or the book of Revelation, where you do find it as well. I would say it's totally false. What you do find very, very seriously, and what I do accept with utter seriousness, is there are consequences for our actions. If we make the earth unsustainable for ourselves, we will, as a species, have the consequence of destroying ourselves. That's not a punishment. That's a consequence.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the response. I hope that satisfies your thirst there, Constellation. Thank you. Apollo says, was Dom showing Lufan's Sea of Galilee boat?
Yes, that's the boat. In fact, we had the pleasure of meeting Lufan himself when we were there. I think it was 99 when Sarah and I were first there. And yeah, we were there with in preparation for writing and excavating Jesus. I think that's what was going on. And we went to meet him, lovely person, and got to see it in its bath of goo or whatever it was in. Yes, that's the Sea of Galilee boat. And
thank you.
The museum, if you ever get the chance to Galilee, I think that's I'm going to say, besides the lake, that's almost the most important thing to see. And to feel it in the museum, it talks of whether this is the Jesus boat. You know, that's fun. That's just public relations. I saw somebody arguing that it's just the right boat for 13 people to fit in. But, you know, if some of them are walking on the water, you can't even figure how many are in the boat and how many are tagging along behind. So the point really is, it is the workhorse boat of the first century Sea of Galilee. The boat that they're presuming for Jesus is this type of boat, without a doubt.
Right.
So
thank you.
It's the squeeze on the boat is what makes it important for me. Thank you very much, Apollos.
Thank you. Thank you. Trip says, what are your thoughts on apocatastasis? Universalism. I can't even pronounce this. What is this? How do you pronounce that?
Apocatastasis, I think. Apocatastasis. Apocatastasis or universalism.
Thank you for the super chat, by the way.
Yeah, let me think, Trip. Well, you know, I really would want it qualified before I could go applaud it and come. I can imagine the universalism of the graveyard. I'm thinking of, you know, Calgacus's in what is it, Tacitus's story of Agricola, and when he's trapped the Scottish rebels, and the Scottish leader Calgacus says of the Romans, you make a desert and call it peace. I don't want the universalism of the desert, or the universalism of the total control of the autocrat. I want to know the adjective that goes with universalism. Do you understand my problem? What type of universalism? Is it the universalism of the autocrat, the despot who has total control, and you daren't even say anything different, or you may be killed? And in fact, you cannot even think something because you have to make an oath of allegiance. I want to know the universalism.
I'm wondering if they're implying post-mortem universalism, the idea of all things being saved or redeemed.
Could you qualify it, Trip, in any way that would give me more of an idea?
Yeah, Trip, I'll keep an eye out for you if you don't mind qualifying that. I don't know if they've already been able to do that or not.
And maybe I simply don't know what it means myself.
Yeah, I'm wondering if it's more like the idea of people go to hell, and some people think that in the end, all things will be reconciled in Christ. Even the devil himself, according to some theologies, will be saved in the end, or something like that. I don't know. But I'll wait on Trip to respond.
Okay, just to see.
Constellation Pegasus, again, thank you for the super chat. In 60 seconds, what's your final opinion on who Jesus was?
60 seconds. I don't need it. Jesus was a peasant with an attitude. And if you're a Christian, you believe his attitude was that of God.
Well put. Thank you so much, Constellation Pegasus. Again, as mode US UK 1, what reception does Dr. Crossan get from his former colleagues in the Catholic Church to his work, particularly emphasis on Jesus as a political figure?
If I could take probably as an example, because the most important Roman Catholic theologian, historian of the historical Jesus, without any doubt, I mean, with 5 books of a 7-book, at least 7 books coming out, is John Meyer, Father John Meyer from Notre Dame. And I disagree profoundly with him in his last book, and I disagree profoundly in the sense that I would be very happy to sit with him anywhere and have a debate on it, or that's what I mean. What is at stake, for example, in his last book, he says the message of Jesus is pretty much the message, and he uses this, of a hurricane, of a person who is warning Florida that a hurricane is coming. You have no control over it. The most he is doing is telling you, duck, telling you, hit the cellar. It's coming. You're not participating in it. It's in no way are you collaborating with it. Jesus is announcing the hurricane. That's what he uses. I think he calls it Hurricane Thea, Thea. Hurricane Thea is coming. That's the message of Jesus. And if you want to call it the kingdom of God, fine. But it's coming like a hurricane, and you have no control over it. All you can do is submit to it or be squashed by it. And he insists throughout his books from the very beginning that the historical Jesus has no relevance today. All right, I disagree profoundly with that. I am extremely appreciative of the clarity with which he writes, because it makes a dream to debate with him. You don't think that you're, working with cotton wool. You don't quite know what's been said. It's crystal clear. Jesus is telling you it's coming. I live in Florida. I know when the hurricane is coming. All you can do is get ready, wait. You know it's coming, of course. You can't participate except insofar as getting ready and saving yourself and helping people or something like that. I objected to that by simply saying that's not the vision I see in Jesus's vision of the mustard seed. The mustard seed doesn't at all look like a hurricane to me, just to keep it very simple. So that would be a profound disagreement with him. And he is by far, if there be his 5 books, I have all 5 of them, and they are marked up almost unbelievably, because I've read every single word of them and every single footnote, and they're about that thick. And I think there's at least 2 more to go, and maybe he finds out there's 3 more, because he hasn't talked about the titles of Jesus, and he hasn't talked about the crucifixion or resurrection. So he would be a major disagreement with me. But you understand, I am actually, though, I would want to say this. I am actually operating as a historian and a theologian. He is emphatically operating only as a historian. He says this has no theological emphasis. I find it absurd to say that Jesus of Nazareth as a historical figure is not in continuity with or contact with the Jesus who is confessed as Messiah, Son of God. That makes no sense to me. Because it makes absolute sense to me, as I've said, in the 1st century, for somebody to look at Jesus and say he's the Messiah, if somebody did, or he's the Son of God, which is a good anti-Roman term, or Savior of the world. These are all the terms of Caesar. So any title given to Caesar, I can imagine, I'm not saying it happened, being used of Jesus. I don't have to wait till his resurrection or the 2nd century or anything else. He was born in the age of Augustus, the Savior of the world, the bringer of peace.
Thank you. That is really interesting to parse through that in my mind, and to continue diving into this material and thinking it in ways of you and others. Thank you for the super chat, Hengfa. Hope I'm saying that correctly. The Legio Ferrata.
Yeah.
Apparently had a major camp near Megiddo. When did this legion come into play in the area, and did any of their members enter into the state mythology of Rome?
All right. In the 1st century, before the War of 66 to 74, there were no legions stationed in the Jewish homeland, even though they did come south to put down the war of 4 BCE. They went back. After that war, there was a camp called Legio. By the way, I pronounce Latin the way I learned in the classical high school when I was 11 years of age. It's the Roman Catholic Italian way of doing it. And I suppose my prejudice is if the Italians don't have Latin right, nobody has it right. So if you pronounce it Legio, just do it by all means. If you're a student, do whatever your teacher does. And when you graduate, do whatever you want. So yes, after the war of 66 to 74, that's when it was stationed there. That's when the Roman view of this Jewish homeland started, as I said before, to start inching towards maybe this is just, should we squash it more? It's a tiny homeland to have a legion in it. You know, there was 4 legions in Syria to protect the whole Euphrates frontier against the Parthians, the only other decent empire in the world. And they have 1 now down in the Jewish homeland. So that's already a statement.
That was a problem. Now, did any of their members from the Legion enter into the state mythology of Rome?
Oh, I would take it for granted. I would probably take it for granted that they would have. The only thing you have to understand about the legions is that they could come from pretty much anywhere in the Roman world. They could be Celts, for example, converted Celts, shall we say. So they could have their own gods as well. But they certainly would have to have the state mythology of Rome as the dominant one.
Thank you so much for that. Tim Pulver, thank you for that super chat. And Tim says, don't know how to attach message to super chat, but thank you, Dom, for your life's work. And thank you, Derek, for the work you are doing now.
Well, you did it, Tim. Thank you very, very much for that. I do appreciate it, by the way.
Thank you. Yeah, Dom, there's a lot of fans of yours that have studied you for 20 years or more. Abel Chavez, thank you for the super chat. Does Jesus mean pig in Latin? If so, then perhaps this is a racial slur or name to the collective and entirety of the human race, not just a person, something mind-blowing thing. I have uncovered myself. Reincarnation?
I don't know. I can't even remember what the Latin for pig. Getting old. I don't think so. I mean, maybe I have a blind spot, but I hear an awful lot of these tiny linguistic breakthroughs, and I never find them do enough to me to help me with the big picture. Do you know what I mean? The title that Jesus would be given in the first century, if he was given that title, would be Messiah. And nobody in Rome, in Latin or Greek for that matter, would have a clue what it meant until they found out what it meant. And then it would be a question of whether it was violent or non-violent. So I don't think it's a racial slur. It just seems to be the root, Judeus of Jew and Judean and everything else. So I don't see it.
Thank you. Thank you, Abel. Chris Wood says, appreciate you, Derek and Dr. Crossan. To clarify, does Dr. Crossan view Jesus as a charismatic populist leader like Gandhi, perhaps more open to violence, sell your cloaks, and buy a sword?
No, I do see him as a charismatic populist leader, yes. I think the major issue, though, is that, well, Gandhi does too, is that Jesus insists that nonviolent resistance, I'm talking now about his statement that, become heirs of God, he says sons of God, become heirs of God because God is nonviolent. He brings up the sun on the just and the unjust, gives rain to the good and the bad. So Jesus doesn't, or God doesn't practice violence. I consider that Jesus is moving within, please hear me very carefully, is moving within the experiments in non-violent resistance practiced in the Jewish homeland between the war of 4 BCE, we just talked about, and 70 years later, the war of 66. Between those 2 violent rebellions, Gandhi tells us writing through gritted teeth because he dislikes it, of all sorts of experiments, massed, organized experiments in nonviolent resistance. I talk about that in the last section of the book from Josephus. Now, in that world, somebody like that could be understood and was understood as a revelation from God. Gandhi did too. Gandhi was a Jain Hindu who wouldn't stand on a bug because a bug was life. So if you wouldn't stand on a bug, if you wouldn't use violence to a bug, why would you use violence to the English, to the the British Empire, which is only a great big bug, as it were? So his Jain Hinduism was the religion that made him move towards nonviolent resistance. And talking to Christians, he could use the Sermon on the Mount, but he was there already. He didn't need the Sermon on the Mount or Jesus or even Tolstoy. Gandhi had it as a Jain Hindu to begin with, Jain Hindu. So what you find actually in the New Testament is already hints at moving away from the nonviolence of Jesus, not just in Revelation, but even in, what does it say for in the Q Gospel? Let me make certain I get this right. In the Q Gospel version, Jesus says, "Don't carry a staff." Now, please leave swords out. Swords are for for aristocrats, unless they're rebels. The ordinary defensive weapon of the ancient Near East for a peasant was what the Irish call a shillelagh, a staff, a nice big staff that you'd walk along with, and it would keep those dogs, the wild dogs around the borders of the village from annoying you. And everyone else would have to calculate, maybe could they take you? So the staff was the ordinary defensive weapon. And it could be offensive, of course. So to tell people not to carry a staff is like wear a sign to say available for violence or available to be mugged. I mean, wandering around without a staff would make people, what's wrong with that guy? That's why in Mark, you find the contradiction, carry a staff. Now, between sometime in the 50s with Q and sometime in the 70s with Mark, Christians have tried, or Messianic Christians or Messianic Jews, let's call them, this moving around without a staff, it doesn't work. So it's terribly important for me that they bother to contradict it. If nobody was doing it, if this was just a piece of wild imagination of the Q communities, then you wouldn't bother have to deny it. So it's important to understand that precisely because it's contradicted by Mark, they were attempting programmatic nonviolent resistance.
So sell your cloaks and buy a sword. Can you tell us what you think is going on in this particular passage?
That moves it up to the same things. Forget the staff, get a sword.
Okay, got it.
I don't think any of the apostles could have afforded a sword unless they joined a violent rebellion, in which case the swords were provided. The ordinary peasant didn't have a sword in their hut or hamlet or something like that. So, yes. Now remember, in that first century, it was quite possible, I repeat, to have the leader of a movement considered to be a son of God if they were considered as a revelation from God. That's the language of the first century. It's probably not my language. I mean, the greatest thing I could probably imagine giving somebody today, I couldn't do it, of course, Nobel Prize for Peace, but that's been contaminated by some of the people who've got it already. Start a war, end the war, you get the prize. But what do we do when somebody today would do something of transcendental value for the human race? Can you imagine it? What would we call such a person? I suppose the only thing we can imagine, supposing a plague came and we couldn't do anything with it, there was no vaccine or anything else, and somebody invented the vaccine when we had lost, say, 1/3 of the human race. we would probably, I suppose, revere that person, but in the first century, that person would be divinized. And when that person died, they would be assumed they were taken up among the gods or up to God. That's their language. And I will acknowledge people's language. I will not use it necessarily, except by saying, now here's what I understand is happening there. This person has done something of extraordinary value for the human race, and therefore they call him divine because they manifest. That's my mantra. And I would certainly accept the language. And then if I read a text that says Caesar is divine, Son of God, Savior of the world, Redeemer from sin, Jesus is Son of God, Savior of the world, I will say, nah, I think I'm on the side of Jesus.
Oh, really? Yeah. So this is the thing I'm doing. Like, obviously, Suetonius, you can't really see it here, Lives of the Caesars. But when I'm reading it, for me, right, I'm thinking if you put on the boots of a Roman in the first century after everything that happened, and you are a Roman, you're going to say that Augustus is that. If you're a Jew from Galilee, you're going to say Jesus is that. Now, obviously, who, if you painted the whole picture with modern hindsight's 2020, kind of seems to have a better image. And which one would you say is more moral in that respect? One might argue for Jesus.
Well,
it seems to be more peaceful.
Let me push you, Derek, a bit.
Okay.
I'm not arguing for morality. I'm arguing from evolution.
Okay.
Let me be very clear in my argument. If we had today, if you could imagine it, Jesus and Augustus running for president of the United States. Okay. Right. Each would have a platform because obviously they're running against one another. They can't say we're both here for peace. Everyone say, what's the difference? They can't say we're here, Son of God. They have exactly the same title. So we have to come down. What's your program? What's your platform? Now, Augustus is going to say, my platform is the same as it's always been. After I pacify you with the help of the legions, there will be peace. And he could say, quite honestly, look at the Pax Romana. It's really working. And of course it's working. Now, if you're on the periphery, on the Rhine or the Danube, but for the moment, it's working. Now, along comes Jesus, who's read the book of Daniel, says, yeah, one more empire. They always come and they always go, and the next one's always more violent. This is not peace. This is lull, L-U-L-L. My vision is of, he might say if he knew it, Isaiah or Micah, where we beat our swords into plowshares and our spears into pruning hooks. And we have our own fig trees, not somebody else's stolen fig trees. And no one is afraid anymore. And we can all have our own vines. It's a different vision for the world. Mm-hmm. Now, when I look at evolution, and I mean by evolution what everyone else means by it, human evolution, across the last, you pick it, 6,000, 10,000, 70,000 years since our species left Africa, we are mired in escalatory violence. By escalatory violence, I mean we have never created a weapon we didn't use. You might give me a debate on the hydrogen bomb, but okay. The atomic bomb. We managed to get from the iron sword to the atomic bomb in 3,000 years. We're good at this. Here again, the first iron sword is only 3,000 years ago. Now we're at the atomic bomb. We got to a stealth bomber within a century from the Wright brothers on Kitty Hawk, North Carolina. Mm-hmm. We are really good at stuff. And unfortunately, one of the stuff we're good at is more devastating weapons. Now, I ask you at the evolutionary trajectory, leave morality, please, out of the side. Why do we think we won't eventually destroy our environment and our species? That's a trajectory. It's not a prophecy. It's looking at the past on a trajectory. If you wanted to focus on climate control, that's just one small blip on that whole radar. Can we survive as a species if we continue to make war on our world? That's an evolutionary question. I have no idea that, we'll be safe, we'll get away with it. I'm talking consequences. So I would requote the last line in the book. I do it. The last line, with all due respects to Martin Luther King Jr. I say not the moral arc of the universe, but the evolutionary arc of the universe arcs towards justice. Slowly, to be sure, because it did take us 3,000 years, but we're getting faster and faster, the escalation of weaponry. So all of that raises for me the question of the evolutionary sustainability of our species. That's my question.
Mm-hmm. I mean, if you're the quest that Jesus is saying in nonviolent sense of trying to find this peace that we're talking about, taking the swords and beat them into plowshares and whatnot, absolutely, I'm on board with that, and I think that that's important. I think a lot of people are interpreting Jesus in different ways as well, and then you have cults that take words Jesus said, like Jehovah's Witnesses, with fictive kinship and like divorcing from family members and like hating mothers and fathers, and is this really from the mouth of Jesus, things like that. So is it fair to say let's cherry pick what we think is a good example of heading in that evolutionary trajectory for survival from Jesus?
No. I'm back to the big. I honestly don't cherry pick. I judge against the history. The reason that I actually criticize the book of Revelation so much is not because I don't like the idea of Jesus coming back on a war horse to slaughter evil people. Every now and then I do get dreams like that. Well, I don't get dreams. I think of the day, and I would like some solutions of somebody coming back on a war horse, pruning the herd, as we say. No, I think it just, when I put it into its own history, it just wasn't right. I mean, the book of Revelation announced that Rome slaughtered Christians and Christ is coming back soon to slaughter Romans. It's wrong. That's the first. I mean, you can keep saying it's going to happen if you want to, but it's wrong after 2,000 years. So I'm asking all the time, take anything, put it back into its matrix. Now, for example, supposing you say that I brought not the peace but the sword, you were hinting at it, okay? That's not what Jesus said. He said, I've come to bring not peace but the sword, to set. Now, he doesn't say the husband against the wife. He says the generations against one another, the father against the son. He doesn't say siblings against one another. He's not splitting up the family. What he's doing is warning that, and he's perfectly right, when something new happens, again and again, when a paradigm shift happens in politics, in religion, in business, very often the old generation is still hanging on to their Blackberries, and the new generation already has an iPhone. It's across generations. So Jesus says, my program is going to split the generations. Yeah. I wonder what the father of James and John thought about them becoming fishers of men. What did the parents think about it? So the generation, the divide between the generations is, yes, when something novel happens. So just to take Jesus saying, I've come not to bring peace but the sword, and to stop there, it's really not valid. You should finish the sentence, as it were. Mm-hmm. I've come to set. Now, if you want to break up families, set the husband against the wife, the siblings against the siblings, that'll take care of it. He's saying that this is going to set families against one another. And I think across the generations, something new usually does.
Thank you so much. There's so much stuff to get into here. I'll skip that for now because we can small talk. I'm gonna have to make a trip to Florida one day where we can keep doing interviews like we were. Abel Chavez is back again saying they perhaps used the wrong words, not sure by mistake or by design, but they intended to use reincarnation wording, not resurrection. Quran rewords.
Yeah. All right, again, I'm saying the same thing. Maybe I'm getting boring. When I hear
you're good.
When I hear the word resurrection, okay, when I hear it, in the first century context, okay? In the first century, I hear it like this. I can't not hear it otherwise. In the first century, there were two terms, two separate terms. One is called ascension or assumption. It's apotheosis in Greek. The entire world, the Greek world, the Roman world, the Jewish world, understood that a great hero or a great saint, Romulus for the Romans, Moses for the Jews, could be taken up to God at death. That was an individual phenomenon. It happened only to individuals. It's called ascension or assumption. Resurrection. Resurrection is a Pharisaic term. It is a sectarian term within Judaism. It is meaningless to the Romans, meaningless to the Greeks, and meaningless to many Jews in the first century. It's a Pharisaic belief in this. The Pharisaics said, there is such a thing as cosmic justice. They said it to the Sadducees who were running the world, Jewish world. There's a cosmic justice at the very end time. There will be a general resurrection, a universal resurrection. It never meant personal. A universal resurrection followed by a general judgment, followed by hell or heaven, put it in simple language. That's what resurrection meant at the end of time. Now, when Paul says the resurrection has begun with Jesus, he's just been a good Pharisee still. And he's saying that means that judgment has begun and heaven and hell are already realities in this world. Resurrection has a technical meaning in the first century. It doesn't mean whatever you want it to mean. It does not mean reincarnation. It really does.
That's what Abel followed up with this super chat I brought up, was both holy books, Bible and Quran, are coded message, not Bible codes, though they might play into it. But if you put both message together, means reincarnation for the human race, especially the Jew.
Abel, I would have to disagree with you. That's not the way I see it. The coded message is only coded because we don't know history. If I were to take up a Bible and see it written in Hebrew, until I decode that, the message is only coded because, how would I put this? We are reading, let me focus on the New Testament, keep it simple. I'm reading a Greek text 2,000 years old. Why on earth would I think I understand that text if I just put it into English? When I used to go to Turkey every year in the 20s, I'd see the headlines. Even English-speaking Turkish newspapers, I wouldn't have a clue what they were talking about. I mean, I could read it in English because I wouldn't know. It's all local news, local problems, local this, local that. I don't know the matrix. The idea that you could take a 2,000-year-old text, Son of God, resurrection, justification, all that lovely language, and automatically know what it means because you put it into English, is rubbish. Somebody would have to put it into the matrix of its own time and place and say, for example, I know I'm getting probably boringly quoting, when they said God, when they said resurrection, when they said Lake of Tiberias, when they said this, here's what was at stake.
Yeah.
In the same way that today we're all attuned, if somebody says today, let me use an example, do you think ex-President Trump will run again? I know immediately what it means. I don't say Trump. I don't know who that is. I know because we're in the matrix. Matrix means knowing all the stuff to know what's going on. It's not mysterious. It's just the context of its own time and place. All of us listening here would understand stuff if somebody says, what do you think about COVID? You wouldn't say COVID. What's that? But if somebody 2,000 years ago said, what about X? We'd have to know the matrix. We'd know the whole matrix of COVID. You might say to me, what, is it back? Well, I haven't heard anything about it anymore. I think it's gone. Matrix is the background. It's the foreground you can't, it's the background you can't skip. It's the context that you can't omit. It's what everyone knows who knows what's going on. And when you're living here, we take it for granted if you're kind of listening to the news or whatever. So when you read the New Testament, What I'm begging you to do is don't say resurrection. Wow, that must mean the guy coming out of the grave. Wow, if I was there with a camera, I could have caught him. Flashbulb. The first thing, and it's work. I'm sorry. It's much more fun to do trivia pursuits and say, well, I think resurrection means just feeling good. That Jesus didn't feel bad about it.
Right.
I have to ask, and I know it's work, and that's why a book like this involves a certain amount of work. I can give you my conclusions, and you can say, well, Crossan's a nice guy with a weird accent, and he's great fun, so we go along with his conclusions, but that's not education. Education means you know the matrix. And then you can go to the matrix yourself and say, well, I've read everything I can get about resurrection in the first century, and I think now we've got a discussion.
Wow, there's so much here. Okay, Tripp says, yes, universalism as in the universal salvation.
Do I think, excuse me, do I think there is universal salvation? No. No. Not unless we change. The human species is heading for its own destruction unless we change. That is the message of Jesus. Jesus offers the human species salvation. Now, if you think heaven and hell are locations in the future, Tripp, I do not. I think heaven and hell are options in the present. And right now, it's touch and go, which is winning. Hell's doing very well at the moment.
So you take these, just so our audience understands, you're taking an approach that's more metaphorical for the terms of hell and heaven, right? Or are you taking this to be ontologically post-mortem? Like, I think that the typical person, most people who would ask that question are saying, do you think in the end of all things, God's going to redeem everyone in some salvific afterlife sense? And this is the way they're understanding that.
No, because that presumes something wider. That presumes a theistic God who is a supreme being separate from the universe. I do not believe in a supreme being. I believe in the supremacy of being. And I know it through evolution. That's how I see how it works. So right now, for example, I see, if I watch the news on the borders of Russia and Ukraine, I see hell at work. Let me be very clear. Nobody has ever depicted hell to me in any way, or depicted it or described it in any way that comes faintly close to what we have done within the last 100 years on Earth. Not even close to what we have done and justified in the last 100 years. So I am actually talking about our species on Earth. And I see heaven and hell. You were right to say they're metaphors when I read them in the Bible. But they're not metaphors if you're on the borders of Ukraine and Russia. Hell doesn't look like a metaphor at all. But the hell of the Bible is a metaphor of what we're doing on Earth. And the heaven of the Bible is a metaphor for what we're doing on Earth. So I would like to take this all back out of the future into the present. Hell and heaven are options in the present, and everyone who's ever lived has made their own 100% or 1% option in which to live. But if you look at the trajectory of the human species, it doesn't look good for me at the moment that we are a sustainable species. That's, as I said, that's not a prophecy. I don't want to be right. But when we are talking today about the sustainability of oil and all the rest of it, these are like little blips on that same radar. The question is the sustainability of a species.
There's actually a book I just read. In fact, I was reading it when I left from Florida back up to North Carolina, A Short History of Life on Earth by Henry G.E.E. And you get to the point where you finally, like, he goes through everything from the Big Bang down into our cosmos, where our Earth is, and then finally gets to life on Earth. And you're like, oh, wow, you're learning about hominids. You're finding out about some interesting stuff, and then he goes, all right, now the extinction. let me describe to you what is inevitable. Like he is convinced it's just a thing. And he's like, yep, we're going to go extinct. And here's how I think this will happen based on the science that we looked at. And he's seeing a trajectory and whatnot. And like, it really was surreal reading it, listening to it really in my ears, thinking to myself, I'm going to interview him on my channel. Anyway, I don't want to sidetrack.
Can I make a distinction too?
Yeah.
I want to talk between external and internal extinction. I mean, we know, for example, if a meteor took off as big as the Earth and was heading hit, that would be the end. Okay. That's an external extinction. That we have no control over. We really can't do anything about that. I mean, maybe we could hit it with an atomic bomb over it. I don't know. But that's an external extinction. I'm talking about internal extinction, what we are doing.
Right.
And the shortcut I said, I think the last time, is our species, that's Homo sapiens, came out of Africa only 70,000 years ago. And what we did, I would say in summary, is we declared war on the world, on the environment and ourselves. I don't know how to get around that. That's the way I see it if I look 70,000 years back. Now, what we do about it is wide open for me. I do not consider that closed. I'm just watching a trajectory, but trajectories can change.
Thank you, Dom. Apollo's Christian apologetics. Deification was criticized by Roman writers, whereas Jesus worship was relatively uncontested by Christians, though expressed differently. Thoughts?
Yeah, you're right. Who was it? Plutarch kind of mocked the whole thing. I've read it recently for something else, and took case after case and kind of explained it away. But that's Roman aristocrats. I think they had to be very, very careful when they were talking about the emperor. Yeah, they could discuss. Tacitus could sneer about the emperors who are gone, and I would say none of the Roman poets, Virgil, Ovid, Horace, Ovid on a good day, would have said to Augustus, you do understand, your Imperial Highness, you're just a metaphor. I think, they would have been very careful about that. They would probably have said, well, the world is at peace and he must be the one, because that term that we saw on the cover of the book, Sebastos, I mean, it's almost, we translate it as Augustus, which sounds nice, but Sebastos means the one to be worshipped. And I think I said the last time, why is he the Theos Sebastos? Isn't every Theos to be Sebastos? Why isn't every god to be worshipped? Is there any gods that you kind of are just there for entertainment? So the Theos Sebastos tells me, okay, yes, of course, everyone is to be worshipped. But now when we're getting serious, Augustus is the one to be worshipped. He has to be worshipped, worshipful in his name, Sebastos. We've lost it in Latin with Augustus. So I think, of course, that the philosophers might debate this, but philosophers had to be very careful when they came to discuss Augustus or the reigning emperor.
That's why I mean, that video I actually put on the thumbnail on the Patreon for those that are interested in actually going and checking it out.
Thank you for that.
Absolutely. Jesus versus Caesar. And in fact, I did get Tiberius Caesar here as the image on the left side of this thumbnail. That's already on Patreon. If you want to join, you can. But really, behind Tiberius is really the first emperor that is officially the emperor, Augustus. And of course, his father, Julius Caesar. But Augustus is the guy who really sets everything in motion and makes it all happen. And of course, that's why I was bringing up Suetonius' Lives of the Caesars. So much interesting stuff. But I do want to emphasize something in this question that Apollos brought up to get your thoughts.
I hold you for a second, by the way. Your people probably know that the emperor's vision there with his head veiled like that means that he's participating at that moment in sacrificial activity. So this is him as priest.
That's why I did that too.
Yeah, he's not only the emperor.
I didn't want him in his like war outfit, or he's
like, exactly
right. I wanted him to be similar to Jesus as a figure, exactly. And that's why I did that.
Exactly.
So real quick in this question though that I thought was interesting is Apollos, my buddy here, he's a Christian apologist, and I think that he's trying to say, look, Roman writers are willing to kind of say, yeah, we're criticizing this deification of these figures. They're metaphors. Like, they don't really believe in these things. But Jesus worship, or Christians or followers of the Christ, were relatively uncontested, like in this approach on how they worshiped Jesus.
Okay.
What would you say to that? I mean, we have poets, for example, who don't quite buy into the whole picture. Is it fair to say some Christians later on, a couple centuries later, are kind of like the Roman poets, where they're like, well, Jesus was, like an image like that, but they weren't full on worship?
Yeah. Yes, of course. That's well, they were Arian, you mentioned before, of course, because here's what's going on. Forget Jesus for a moment. In the book of Exodus, when Moses says, let my people go, he also said, let my son go. The word son, especially as beloved son, our only son, our firstborn son, in the biblical tradition and in Jewish patriarchal thinking, is the firstborn son. The heir is the firstborn son. So it is perfectly valid throughout the Bible when you're talking about David being the son of God, which is in there, cross out son and put in H-E-I-R, heir. Now that's a huge claim, to claim David is the heir of God. That's what they mean by son. That's why the father image and the son image becomes so important. In the Bible, the father is the householder. You can go to the Bible, anytime God is called the father, cross it out and put in householder, because what they're imagining is the same way that the householder in a house runs a fair house, where everyone gets a fair distribution of food and clothing and everything else. God is the householder of the world house. That's where they get their vision of equality, fairness, distributive justice. God is like the householder or the housekeeper of the world house. So to say Jesus is son does not mean there's another God. I wouldn't have had a debate with a Muslim theologian on that. Well, that's two gods. No, it isn't. When they said Jesus is son of God, what they mean in the biblical tradition, he's the heir of God. That means that all the God stuff comes to us through Jesus. That's a huge claim. You want to see what God looks like? Look at Jesus. That's the claim. Now, taking that tradition into the New Testament, they were already prepared to say Jesus is the Son of God. And also, of course, it contradicts Caesar is the Son of God. They had it, as it were, on two fronts, in their own tradition and in an anti-tradition to Rome. So they were ready to say that. Now, if then you get into Greek philosophy, and when all else fails, get into Greek philosophy and mess everything up, because then the poets give way to the lawyers. That's not a crack at anyone. But poets work with metaphor. Lawyers work with exact meaning of words. You want a lawyer when you're selling your house because he has to say exactly what it means. But when the lawyers come in, they want to know what exactly does it mean to say that Jesus is Son of God, and what exactly does it mean to say that the emperor, now let us say he's Constantine, is the Son of God. What exactly is the difference? So they want precision, and that's where you start getting arguments. How exactly is Jesus Son of God, or God incarnate, or anything else? And we're often running then with not having a clue what anything means. And we're inventing Greek concepts of one substance with the Father. Now, if I use the word substance in English, I'm looking down at my computer, it's on a table, it's a substantial table. That means it's solid. So, okay, there's a good translation for one substance with the Father. Jesus is solid with God. Because that's the term we use now, solid, isn't it? Do me a solid. Yeah. Okay. Jesus is substantial. Okay, solid with God. It means that you look at Jesus, you can get a good view of God.
Right.
Well, that's exactly what the New Testament claims. For us, you want to see, imagine God walking around in sandals, as I said, with a cloak. Look at Jesus, don't look at Caesar. That's a huge claim. And then, of course, you have to break it down for what it means. But that's what happened. So Apollos is quite right. when they start getting into how exactly do we understand this in Greek philosophy, I'm going to make a suggestion. When the Romans said that Caesar was divine and God and Son of God, they never called a conference at Nicaea to wonder how in Greek philosophy that was possible. The Romans would have said, if the Greek philosophers don't understand it, the legions will explain it to them. And if you still don't understand it, we'll further explain it to you with the legions. But Caesar is Son of God and divine and Sebastos and the whole bit. So, if you get into Greek philosophy, maybe Greek philosophy can't handle it. Maybe
So just real quick, I'm going to be interviewing Trolls Edinburgh Peterson on his Paul on Identity. I don't know if you know who he is, but Theology is Politics, and he argues that Paul's actually more of a Stoic, and we get confused because later Christians are using Middle Platonism and then Platonism, of course, Neoplatonism, to explain this stuff, and it's like, no, Paul's probably a Stoic, and working within first century, he says, Stoicism, not. Like, he's going to get down into the weeds in this interview, and I hope it goes well. But just emphasizing that point, Jesus' worship was relatively uncontested by Christians, though expressed differently. I think what Apollos is trying to say is, whereas Romans and poets and lawyers and whatever, they could all kind of dispute, wink, and say, yeah, we don't really think that Caesar's God, or, we don't really worship him like he's a deity, whatever. Christians seem to be, according to what I think he's trying to say, unanimously accepted that Jesus really was like worthy of worship and legit, may have even been divine, like what we're seeing with the Caesar. But later we do have Christians that are saying, no, he wasn't divine. Arian, that type of branch of Christianity is already doing this stuff. So would you say that that's, I don't know. How would you respond to that?
Okay. Let me say the first thing. Paul was a Pharisee. That's a sect within Judaism. Paul never ceased to be a Pharisee. That's why resurrection is so important for him. Paul was able to convert from being a non-Messianic Jew to a Messianic Jew because he was already halfway there. He'd already accepted resurrection as a possibility. I'd like to see a Sadducee converting. That would be far harder. Anyway, so whether he was a Stoic or not, okay, fine.
Or he's aware of Stoic philosophies.
Of course he is. Yeah. That's like you and I are aware of Jung or Freud. It's in our atmosphere. Does that mean we have read necessarily Freud in the original German? No, or even in English translation. I don't think I've ever done. Maybe I've read bits and pieces, but I don't think I've ever done it. I've read a biography of Freud, but I got bits and pieces in there, but I've never read the original works. But I know of him. He's part of the matrix of my world, I suppose. I want to come back with that word worship. Okay? In the Greek and Roman gods were gods of power. Okay? You didn't go to any Greco-Roman god to learn how to live. You went to the philosophers to learn how to live, the Stoics, for example. You did not go to Jupiter to learn how to live, because if you learned how to live from Jupiter, you'd be executed almost immediately for rape. Multiple rape, serial rape, to speak. They were gods of power. You wanted them on your side, the same way as you wanted any powerful autocrat, despot, unpredictable boss on your side who might just kill you for entertainment. Now, when you switched over, did you worship them? Of course you did. But worship them was flattering them. Worship meant flattery. It was very important that you treated their temples well, that you built their temples. I'm not caricaturing. That's what it meant. They were power. Now, you wanted holiness, you went to the philosophers. How to live a good life. And you had to choose your philosopher. Over in Judaism, the weird thing was they put together God, holiness, and power. That's what really made Judaism weird. because their God was a God of powerful holiness. So it wasn't just enough to flatter this God and say, oh, you're really great. Oh, God, God, God. You had to do what this God said. Oh, now that was something new. That was something new. Where was the list of demands from Jupiter? Beyond maybe worship me. So worship meant something substantially different in the Jewish tradition and in the Greco-Roman tradition. That's not putting one better than the other. If I was a good Roman and wanted to lead a holy life, I had to pay a certain respect for the power of the gods, but I really was either a Stoic or an Epicurean or a Cynic or one of the great options in Rome, or I had my own personal God, which was quite possible. So when you talk about worship, we have to really understand it really is something terribly different in those two traditions.
Thank you. Thank you. We need to dive deeper into this at some point. Tripp says, can you help us understand what logos means as it's used in 1 John? It's often translated as word, but I'm told it means more. Maybe you tell us what the Matrix tells us about this.
Yeah. Logos is a marvelous Greek word. I'm going to say the closest I can get in English is the intelligibility of the universe. That basically the universe makes sense. And when we translate it as word, so I mean, if you go back into the wisdom literature, wisdom in the wisdom literature is the closest you can get to logos in John's gospel. Wisdom is there with God from the very beginning. God creates an intelligible world. In other words, the biblical God is not imagined as sort of creating, what would you call it, like one of those fun rooms at a fair where everything changes at any moment, and you get up in the morning and maybe it'll be dark, and you get up at the sun will come up with it, where the world
there's
is
order. There's order from chaos.
There's intelligibility about it. Now you may find a certain amount of chaos, but so the logos is the intelligibility of the universe. So the biblical God creates an intelligible universe, or put another way, logos was there from the very beginning, was with God at creation. Wisdom is almost like a second person of the Trinity, as it were. It's the intelligibility of the universe. So what John says, in other words, then, the intelligibility of the universe has become incarnate in Jesus. Now, please think of that. That's awfully close to what I'm saying about evolution. The intelligibility of the universe. But wait a minute. For me, today, the intelligibility of the universe is known as evolution. That's why I think things are happening. It's why earthquakes, volcanoes, that's why all that stuff happens. It's part of the earth going through calisthenics, as it were. I understand it. I may not like it, but I do understand it. And we can kind of predict it to a certain amount and get ready for it to a certain amount. So the intelligibility of the universe is there, but we call that evolution. So I don't know if I want to say logos should be translated as evolution, the revelation of evolution, because they're not thinking about that.
No.
But I would like us to think about this, and then I may have to, please think of whether religion, I'm talking now in the great big scenario, religion as a phenomenon, happened because people have been getting intuitions of evolution. No, I'm not trying to say that a Paul or a Jesus really kind of understood evolution. But when people looked up at the stars at a time when you could see the stars filling the skies and began to recognize patterns, they're getting intuitions of an order much bigger than us. Maybe the stars are gods or whatever they say, but they're getting intuitions of evolution. So I would consider that any religion is valid insofar as it tracks actually with evolution. And it's because I see evolution as tracking towards nonviolence or else that I respect so much the biblical tradition, because I see it like a locomotive running on tracks already there. So logos then is read the book of wisdom, where it's talking about wisdom being with God at creation and operating with God. Logos is just a male term instead of a female term, wisdom, Hokmah or Sophia. Sapientia also in Latin, they're all female terms. Logos is a male term. So I would read it and think about evolution, at least, if I could put it that way.
Thank you so much. Abel, not boring. Mysteries are not boring. Thank y'all.
Yes. Ain't boring.
Seriously, my Lord says, thanks, MythVision. Keep up the good work. Well, thank you so much.
I think with my Lord, Dominus Meus, I think I will probably have to stop, I would think.
I've got 2. Can I get you 2 more? No more super chats, anybody. Can I get you?
Okay.
Real quick, briefly, as we're wrapping up, I don't want to leave anybody hanging. Constellation Pegasus says, it makes me wonder why Jehovah let Pharisees and Sadducees exist together. You would think that contemplating the temple seems Jehovah killed the people over less infractions.
Yeah, contaminating the temple. I'm afraid if you start with a God who punishes, it's hopeless for me. It just doesn't work, plain language. You keep saying, well, this happened and that happened. Could have been worse. I would say it's one of the human thirsts that maybe it goes back to our childhood. Maybe our first experience is punishment. I don't mean brutalization. I mean just punishment. Forget punishments. I'm going to say flatly, there is no evidence, but lots of counter evidence that Jehovah ever punishes anyone, beyond the assertion, of course, of that all over the Bible. But there is serious, serious, serious evidence of human consequences for what we do.
Thank you so much. Appreciate that, Constellation. Mr. Monster, thank you for the super chat. How important was Hercules and his equivalent to the ancient people and a similarities with Jesus? Yeah,
Hercules was probably a major opponent. Hercules, for example, was a human being who went around doing, hear it again now, the job description, doing magnificent, extraordinary events for the human race by protecting them from monsters, right? That's the job description of a guy who's going to be divinized. And then we go back and then talk about a great birth and everything else. But in that world, Hercules, who does good by, monster killing, is a kind of a competition for Jesus. Now, Jesus goes around healing. The other competition, of course, is Aesculapius. He's an even more serious sin. And I suppose, Dionysius, who invents wine, well, I think he's divine too. I think that's not bad. But please understand, you're dealing with competitions for human beings who have done extraordinary, or what people consider extraordinary, we might say miraculous if you want to, miraculous good deeds for the human race, or at least for our little local human race. And we're going to revere them. We'd put up a temple maybe for them, maybe after they die, or maybe when they're alive, we may call them hero. We'll revere them and we'll ask for their intercession. That's what people do. It's the same way all over the Mediterranean today, especially in the Roman Catholic tradition. You never go to God. You don't even go to Jesus. You don't even go to Mary. You go to your local saint who asks Mary, to ask Jesus, to ask God for whatever you want. That's the good old system of patronage all over the Roman Empire and the Romance countries that live in that same thing. So understand, these would be competing characters.
Thank you so much, John. Dominic Crossan. I wanted to call you Dom there. I'd love to get into the resurrection. What the heck is up with the empty tomb? There's so many things, ascension, apotheosis, I want to get into with you at some point in the future. Thank you for that super chat, Mr. Monster. I must share my screen and let everybody know right now, if you want to have an apotheosis yourself, you want to ascend on high, get a copy of Render Unto Caesar. It is on Audible, so if you're working in the yard, you're cleaning the house, mowing your grass, whatever, put it in your headphones. I promise you, you will not regret it. This book is amazing, and he has plenty of other ones that I want to get into because we're going to have to do episodes on those. Also, if you want to go above that apotheosis, say you already ascend into heaven, and you just really want to like have an awesome mansion in heaven whenever you get there, go check out MythVision's Patreon. Please support us. Go. We have already interviews that are up there, high quality stuff that is not released in the public. And you're helping the community continue to do what we're doing, bringing these episodes to you. Dom, I really appreciate you. Any final words to our audience you'd like to say?
No, thank you. But if you back up for 1 second, that picture you had of my books, I'll tell you, just for fun.
Yeah.
It's see that round picture up there that's to the left of the render. Yeah, you got it there.
Yeah.
I love that because that was taken at Palmyra in 2010, which was the last time you could get into Syria without going in a tank, at least, or in a fighter plane. So it was the last year in Syria, in that temple that was destroyed. So again, when you're thinking of hell on earth, think of local places like that, like Syria now. When I was there, it hadn't happened yet in 2010. It was just beginning. Street demonstrations were becoming a civil war. So I look at so many places I've been in the last 20 years that I can't go back now.
Oh, man.
I mean, I can't go back. It's too dangerous. I mean,
yeah.
Go back in the tank if you will, but that's the only thing that's safe to go back.
Even then, IEDs are, you had the special type of tanks to make that. But yes, please, everybody get a copy of his works. This is why we also are doing the episodes, to let people know about the work. You can take a much deeper dive by getting that. And thank you, Dom, for joining me again, my friend.
Right.
Ladies and gentlemen, never forget, we are MythVision.